Hey everybody! We are delighted to kick off our Rings of Power cast interviews with the star of Season 2, Episode 7, Peachy the Mouse. That's so kind of you to say, Peachy, but no, it's our privilege to have you with us today. But let's jump straight to the climactic scene. As you were preparing for this, what was your understanding of Celebrimbor's psychological state and the efficacy of Mr. Mouse's heroic intervention? Wow, I never thought of that before. Are you suggesting that... Yes, no, I must admit I never thought about that theme from the rodent perspective before. Now, tell me, is there anything you can let me know about the role of rodents in Season 3? What? Wait, I bet the mouse isn't even real. I need to get some sleep. Welcome back to Episode 7. What a doozy. We have a great episode for you. The plot lines are connecting, the tensions are mounting, the shock moments are shocking, and our brains are pondering and processing and exploding.
For real. I'm real glad I've got this therapy dog.
Yeah, I need one too.
A scene that stood out to me in this episode for storytelling was Durin's speech as he rallies the troop to aid the elves. It's a total transition scene, mostly for Prince Durin, but also for our other leading storylines of Galadriel and Celebrimbor. In Khazad-dûm, two realms are planning to come together, elves and dwarves, and Prince Durin is stepping into a leadership role as King Durin slowly goes mad with greed from the ring. That's a lot to accomplish with individual character arcs and with plot lines, and I thought that this scene handled that really well. We open with a close-up on Durin's fists, clenching and unclenching. He's nervous, but he's solid. He's unwavering as his eyes track left and right before he yells, "Warriors!" The camera then pulls back and he walks towards us, kind of stepping into his power. People begin to follow him, already seemingly drawn to his rhetoric. The greatest tale of our time is already being written, and we cut to the two characters currently chained and held prisoner. Galadriel revealing the brooch in her hand that she can use to unlock her chains. Then Celebrimbor, chained, working on the 9 under Sauron's eye. Durin's speech becomes the carry through this montage, connecting and moving along multiple storylines through the rousing speech of unity. He's dead center in the frame, walking towards us and telling us that elves cannot defeat him, not without us. We, in the audience, feel included in that moment. He holds this position throughout and therefore holds us with it. He's emphatic. His speech is short. His statements punctuated heavily, almost like the rhythmic hammering of a chisel to rock. It shows him coming into this role, standing up to the power of the ring, and uniting to help Middle-earth through the loyalty of the dwarves. Show the world that nothing is stronger than us. Then we have this shot that reminded me of all the shots of King Durin we had in season 1. Squared, framed in stone, in a position of authority. The camera rises up to him, framed in the stone opening, overlooking all of Khazad-dûm. He is in charge. He is powerful, and they support him. All the characters here have moved forward, and the freedom and the unity that they have on the table now is clear because of this one short scene.
Our first view of King Durin in episode 7 reminds us of the advanced state of ring corruption he finds himself in. He is on a throne surrounded by scattered heaps of gold, looking more than ever like a dragon resting greedily on its hoard. He is, of course, a rather small dragon, and the vertical shot of the small, cramped space he is in really brings home the ways in which the king's outlook has narrowed and his world has closed in. Narvi appeals to him as a father, emphasizing that more digging can only be done if they fight against his son, and the way Narvi tries to emphasize Disa's presence as well suggests Narvi's own scandalized thoughts at the idea of fighting against a stone singer. Narvi knows that Prince Durin and Disa are in the right. Their move at the end of episode 6, non-violently, on the side of the mountain, against the miners sent by the king, clearly has had a good effect. Narvi is the representative of the common dwarves of Khazad-dûm and of dwarven craftsmanship. Disa has made it plain to him that in obeying the king, he is taking up arms against the mountain itself, and the discomfort he always felt at the king's orders are plainly growing. The king, meanwhile, is deaf to all this. He can think only of the uncounted wealth they miss out on every hour if they do not mine. There's an important distinction for us to make here. King Durin has fallen deeply under the corruptive influence of the ring. Perhaps you're thinking as you watch this, hey, weren't the dwarves supposed to prove difficult to corrupt and less susceptible to the corruption of the rings of power than they proved to be? Didn't Tolkien talk about how stubborn and tough dwarves were? Does the corruption of King Durin undermine that idea? I don't think so. Tolkien says that the Seven Rings do succeed in aggravating the lust for wealth and vengefulness of the dwarves. What he describes the dwarves as being stubbornly resistant to is the domination of their wills by Sauron. It isn't that the dwarves can't be corrupted, it is that Sauron fails to bring them under his control, as he does with the Ringwraiths. Episode 6 showed us Sauron coming to the mountain himself and attempting to get the dwarves to do his will. King Durin refused. Although his presentation of the Mithril to Celebrimbor at the end of episode 6 seems to call this into question, what we were showing was that the dwarves continue to refuse to do Sauron's will. The book gives us no reason to believe that the dwarves were not corrupted by greed and vengefulness. In fact, our most prolonged exposure to dwarven culture, our journey with Thorin Oakenshield in The Hobbit, invites us to see greed for wealth, extreme possessiveness, and quickness to take offense and hold grudges as basic tendencies within dwarf culture. And all that is without any dwarf in the company ever having touched a ring of power. What I think the show gives us is a glimpse into a more ancient dwarf culture before the one that was infected by the Seven Rings. In several ways, Prince Durin is the kind of dwarf that Thorin Oakenshield wishes on his deathbed that he had been. King Durin's is a steep fall from the values that Prince Durin and Disa embody, but his fall does not, in fact, take him that much lower than much that we are shown of subsequent dwarf culture. When Narvi leads the miners to stand with Durin and Disa, he is following their lead very closely. He's taking a stand not against the king, but against the ring which is corrupting the king. Like Prince Durin in episode 6, Narvi perceives and maintains the distinction between the king's heart and the actions that the ring has induced him to take. Notice that for Narvi, this is not fundamentally a political stance. He's not joining with Prince Durin in order to take part in a regime change. Narvi is standing with the mountain itself. He explains that he refuses to let the ring continue to do harm to the mountain that he loves. This situation is elegantly parallel to the situation in Numenor. Miriel has insisted that the faithful remain faithful only to the Valar and not to a political cause. In Khazad-dûm, Durin and Disa have led the way for Narvi and the rest of the dwarves of Khazad-dûm to remain faithful to their traditional and harmonious relationship with the mountain. The infected king has been left alone in a kind of quarantine by the defection of Narvi. His helplessness to satisfy his ring-driven desires pushes him past the snapping point. He takes up his axe and assaults his own people, murdering those who try to stand between him and his desires. This final terrible step is the fulfillment of the shift in priorities we have seen in King Durin ever since he put on the ring. He has gone from protecting his people to exploiting his people, and now to slaughtering his people. I think the choice to have King Durin's violence against his own people happen off-screen is a particularly interesting one. The narrative of the show itself seems to agree with Narvi and Prince Durin in separating the heart of the king from the corruption of the king. It's as if the show is turning its face aside, sparing King Durin the shame of being shown committing this horrible act. Narvi's horrified and bloodied face is witness enough. But there's more. Narvi not only reports the crimes of the king against his people, but he speaks almost as if the king is setting out to rouse the Balrog. The relationship between the Ring of Power and the Balrog in the show is interesting and complicated. Narvi's words invite us to see them in parallel. He says that the king is going to loose that beast, just as the king's own savage and beast-like assault has been loosed by the ring. It isn't that King Durin's ring is merely a symbol for the evil of the Balrog, or the other way round, but there's clearly an affinity between the two. A violent and malevolent evil has been lurking beneath the patient and peaceful culture of the dwarves of Khazad-dûm. That evil, when it's unleashed, the fire and violence of the Balrog will destroy that culture. The Dwarven Ring seems to have unlocked the deep cavern in King Durin's own heart, in which his greed and lust for power has been firmly locked away to this point. Those destructive impulses, once unleashed, have destroyed his principles and overthrown his mind. Now, I am not saying that I believe there's a clear cause and effect relationship between King Durin's ring and the Balrog's appearance. What I mostly want to emphasize is how those two evils echo and parallel each other. But it is possible that there's some other more direct link between them. The fact that King Durin, driven completely mad by the influence of the ring, seems almost to be setting out to release the Balrog on Khazad-dûm does leave the door open for a more direct harmony between the two things. I'm mindful of that brief glimpse of the Balrog in the flames of the brazier that Sauron saw during his visit. Does the dwarf ring give Sauron some kind of opportunity to draw the Balrog to the king? Or maybe the king to the Balrog? It seems possible. Anyway, Narvi's declaration that the dwarves will stand with Durin and Disa is an affirmation of their choice to remain faithful to the mountain. At the same time, Prince Durin receives an even greater affirmation when Narvi tells him that a certain elf is seeking to break his banishment and return to Dwarven lands. Durin's excitement to see his friend again is palpable, and no wonder. The extremely difficult and painful decision to stand against his father without actively revolting against his father left Durin very emotionally vulnerable. A visit from his friend is no doubt just what he needs. His reunion with Elrond in front of the seedling tree next to his home hearth, full of heartwarming insults, seems to be a genuine relief to Durin. It is to his friend, and in the privacy of his own home, that Durin confesses that what he has to do is overthrow his father. I get the impression that Durin has never yet said those words aloud yet, nor perhaps even allowed himself to think them. Unfortunately, Durin's comfort is brief. Elrond goes right to the urgent need that brought on his visit, the likely defeat of the elves without Durin's assistance. This, of course, is the second time Elrond has called upon Durin to take personal responsibility for saving the elves, and Durin's deep sigh suggests that he feels the weight of that. Durin shows no anger. He can clearly see that Elrond's need is sincere and desperate. He clearly does not resent being asked, but it's equally clear that the request puts him in a heck of a pickle. Durin and Disa have succeeded in winning over the dwarves, but the situation is far from stable. Durin has just said that he was about to overthrow his father. Asking someone who is on the verge of executing a political coup, even a benevolent and peaceful one, before they have actually completed said coup, to take some time off and help you with a separate project is asking a lot. When what you are asking, however, is that your friend postpone the transfer of power in order to call up and lead an army, which only a successful transfer of power could enable him to do, you're asking a good deal more. The look on Durin's face shows that he knows he is being asked to do something almost impossible. He has to take command of the dwarves of Khazad-dûm right away, accelerating the regime change which he has not even let himself think about, much less plan for before this moment. And as if it were not hard enough to ask the people of Khazad-dûm to rise up and peacefully set aside their king in favor of Prince Durin, he must frame that request as part of a call to arms against an enemy on foreign soil in support of an ally that the dwarves as a whole neither know nor care about. It's kind of a lot. Durin, however, proves himself to be magnificently up to the task. Durin's great speech, rallying the people of Khazad-dûm to the cause of the Free Peoples against Sauron the Stoneheart, is a phenomenal performance by both character and actor alike. He succeeds in characterizing the madness of the king and the evil of the Seven Rings as an act of war by Sauron against the dwarves. His speech not only encourages the dwarves to take action in defense of their own land, but it also manages to encapsulate the situation to include all of Sauron's enemies. When Durin speaks of the dwarves finding themselves at the crossroad of triumph or tragedy, his words are overlaid with an image of Galadriel, who is herself very plainly facing the same crossroad, as we'll discuss later. When Durin warns that Sauron seeks to enslave the dwarves to his will, the camera shows us Celebrimbor, the greatest of elven smiths, literally chained to his workbench, applying his craftsmanship to the making of tools of Sauron's domination, directly under the Dark Lord's baleful eye. That is the dwarves' nightmare scenario, and presumably Sauron's plan for them all along. Durin's speech and its visual overlays emphasize the connection between the dwarves and the elves. The speech is a beautiful anticipation of the Last Alliance. I love the sequencing of how this scene is shot as well. It begins with a close-up on Prince Durin's face, and you can see him begin mentally and physically preparing himself to deliver this speech. The shot shows us how much this speech means to Durin himself, as if we're seeing him give a little silent pep talk to himself first, before he addresses the dwarves. Then he begins addressing the dwarves of Khazad-dûm, but he is still just in a tunnel or small room, and there are only a few dwarves around him in the shot. As he continues his speech, he walks, and the camera begins moving, and we see more and more dwarves gather to listen to his speech. When he makes his final appeals, he is speaking to a large room thronged full of dwarves enthusiastically receiving his words. But then Durin himself is surprised, and he turns his head and steps to an opening and sees a vast cavern full of the people of Khazad-dûm, all cheering his words and his message. The progressive inclusion of all of the people of the mountain is very inspiring, a clear indication that the values and motivations articulated by Durin are the ones which resonate most deeply with his entire culture. Instead of following the king on the downward spiral into greed and rage, the people are following Prince Durin out into the light. This is especially important because in this speech, Durin is also subtly transforming the entire culture of Khazad-dûm. Their love for the mountain and independence and resistance to evil are now being infused with Durin's own love for his elvish friend and Durin's own conviction that the free peoples of Middle-earth should help one another. The culture of Khazad-dûm has been very wholesome, but also very isolated, and Durin is preparing to end that isolation without compromising the wholesomeness. It's a big step, but it seems clear that we are intended to believe that it's a very good step. Durin's success in rallying the people of Khazad-dûm is the culmination of the victory that he and Disa won in their confrontation with Narvi in the mineshaft. Durin's appearance in a full suit of armor, prepared to lead the army out to save Eregion and to save his friend, has the appearance of Durin's first act as a king. But we're quickly reminded that the conflict in which Elrond's original request placed Durin has not just vanished. Before he can leave, the madness of the king confronts him with a terrible choice. On the one hand, the king's insane and violent act against his people serves almost as a confirmation for the need for Prince Durin's leadership. Even if the people of Khazad-dûm had not been behind Prince Durin in resisting the corrupted king's leadership before, they surely would be now. And yet, Durin himself still must make a hard choice. Narvi spells out the choice as being between saving Eregion and preserving Khazad-dûm. If the king is not stopped, you will unleash the Balrog and Khazad-dûm could be destroyed while Durin is with the army in Eregion. In this moment, Durin is being tested, just as Elendil and the Stranger were being tested in episode 6. Like the stranger, Durin is confronted by the choice between the life of his friend and his duty, his responsibility to continue down the road of the calling he has embraced. Like Elendil, he's confronted with the choice to remain faithful in his relationship to the mountain, or to prioritize the people that he loves over that. And of course, Durin knows that much more than just his friend's life is at stake in the war in Eregion. But what makes this so difficult and so painful is that the choice, though very difficult, seems clear. We do not immediately see Durin's response, but the events of the remainder of the episode show that Durin has chosen to save Khazad-dûm and confront his father. And I think it's clear that Durin has made the right choice. Think back to the Nemarie principle that I was describing in the last episode. Durin has to be well. He must do the right thing. He can only lead the army of the dwarves to save his friend by taking on the leadership of the dwarves of Khazad-dûm. He cannot have the first thing he does as leader be to ignore a serious and imminent threat to his people. Everything he said in his speech about Sauron and fighting alongside the elves was exactly right. But the Balrog is an even more immediate threat. Durin's choice to act first as a good and responsible king is the right choice. Remember also Durin's conviction that his father, his real father, who still has his good heart and has been enslaved by the ring, is still there. Yes, his friend Elrond is in trouble and needs help, but his father is also in need of rescue, is also facing torment and death, and Durin is the only one who can help him. Elrond is certainly going to feel that Durin's choice is a failure and even a betrayal. But as difficult as this call is, I think Durin does it right. In this season, the show has created a remarkable series of painful and challenging moral choices that its characters have been forced to make. And so far, in showing us the outcomes of the decisions the characters make, the show has been consistently aligned with the principles perceptible in Tolkien's work.
All season long, we've been talking about angles and light, so I just want to keep that theme running here. I have to talk about Adar's tent for all of the reasons, including my own therapeutic processing, but let's start by looking at the dark and light theme from the tent and just before. Initially, we have an army of elves on white horses. Seriously, every horse but like 4 were white, and I did not know that was a thing, and they're in gleaming armor. We're shown a field dappled with sunlight and the shadow of a cloud covering part of it. As they charge the orcs, we see the duality so plainly on screen. We get it. The good guys are in white in the sunshine, and the bad guys, the orcs, are dark, dirty, disorganized, and in the shadows. The elves are shot from ground level, looking up at the horses in a position of power, and it's an organized charge. The orcs are handheld shots. It's chaotic, it's ground level, and it's confusing, putting us in that action. Good equals light, bad equals dark. I got it. The link couldn't be more clear here. After the charge halts, we then see Galadriel as the prisoner, and even the cover of her prison cell cart seems to have this yin-yang-like vibe, with the panels both light and dark. We then enter the tent. At this point, I'm starting to wonder, where is the king in all of this? He greets Commander Elrond, but the king was just there. But that's not what we're looking at here. So I digress, but the scene is starting to set me up for a number of things I don't quite get, and I'm interested to look into. So anywho, in the tent, they're both seated, they're equal shots, straight on, no Dutch angle to be seen, and framed squarely on Elrond and Adar in medium close shots. These equal shots and the continuation of the talk about light, we have these lines like Eregion has fallen into shadow, but we also get to start looking at the balance of the scene, or perhaps better, the imbalance. Adar is backed by many bodies, servants, guards, supporters, and on the other side is just Elrond and his assistant. It doesn't quite feel even, 2 against many, and the orcs have one of the elves' own with them. And yet it's all square, even, shared, until Elrond acknowledges Adar's willingness to spill his children's blood. That the sand of the Glandwin will be black with the blood of your kin, he says. And then it cuts to Glug, the orc, and we see the first Dutch angle. He's knocked off kilter in surprise for Adar's cruel sacrifice of their lives. And it's shown in that camera angle. We are also now off balance, and we get it again a minute later when Elrond addresses Glug directly. So this scene is showing us that an even match to start, and then an imbalance of bodies and physical power, then an even match with square shots and well-timed equal banter, then off balance with a Dutch angle. We do not know which way is up. Even though it's a seemingly balanced conversation, it's just really not. And what is this setting us up for? The kiss. It's a well-executed distraction to pull off this plan, right? The orcs are looking away awkwardly as they kiss, so their guard is dropped, and Elrond manages to sneak her the brooch, so she's able to later pick her shackles. Now, here comes my main issue with the scene, and it's not the kiss, whatever. It was a means to an end to get the tool to Galadriel. It's how it was accomplished and how that got messy for me. It's what they showed us versus what it's telling us. Up to this point, we can see that a well-designed imbalance is meant to throw us off here. The desired trick from Elrond to help his friend, and the action to ensure that he could get away with it, but the music does not match what we're seeing. I think the music might be a mistake. Score in a show or film is a non-diegetic sound, meaning that the characters can't hear it. It's a sound overlay that is just for the audience to feel or understand the scene, to recognize what's going on and to feel the big feeling. A score in a film or a show, that non-diegetic sound is meant to guide the emotions of a viewer. It's supposed to carry us through the scene and give us feeling and tone to the visuals and the words. As he steps closer to her, the camera is tilted up slightly, giving him prominence, like he's in charge of the situation, and she reacts to his touch. That's quite sweet. She's gone through an ordeal. The touch of her friend would be a real comfort. But then he goes in for the kiss. The orcs are like, awkward, and they look away as he slips her the brooch to break her bonds. Great, a dupe, a trick, a misdirection, and that distraction to attain the desired outcome of escape. I get it. But as their lips lock, the theme of Galadriel swells in the music, and this is where I struggle. We're being shown the trick. We're being told to believe that it's a distraction so Elrond can hand her the tool in secret. The look on her face confirms that this was a shock of a move, and she is oddly stunned, as we all were, but we get it. It's a trick. It didn't require Galadriel's theme. That's not what this scene was. Galadriel's theme here makes us think that they actually feel something and that they are having a romantic awakening. That's it. It's an epic, passionate moment instead of the misdirection that it was. And props to our music guru, Jordan Rennells, for pointing that bit out to me. Without the theme, we have the trick. With the theme, we have a misdirect that is telling us they might actually be in love. So yes, I suppose it's possible the show could go that way, and it could be read other ways, anything can happen, but I don't think that's what the rest of this scene is showing us, nor what every interaction between the two of them has shown us to this point. A friendship based on respect, with no hint of romance prior to this. I think instead that this is a good example of how a score guides us, almost without us knowing, and that if it's done incorrectly, it can lead the audience straight to the wrong conclusion, and not what the writers or the showrunners concluded. If there was a single instrument playing hesitantly here instead of that full orchestra version of the theme, maybe it would have been passable, but that would have at least shown us some uncertainty. If there was no theme and then the camera zoomed in on her goofy raised eyeball and her shocked face at the end before the cut, it'd be great. We'd get the joke. We'd understand the transaction. We'd know the orcs were fooled, and we'd all be in on the same team, in on the joke and tricking the orcs. But instead, we're now utterly shaken. Yeah, I don't know what's next here either.
There's a lot to say about the battle, and I'm not going to do a breakdown here of the battle tactics or the fight choreography or any of that. I want to keep focusing on the major themes of the show and the episode, and I think that can most easily be done by focusing in turn on the major elvish characters in the episode. Let's start with Adar. There are some really interesting things that this episode does with light and shadow, especially focused on Adar and the orcs. Early in the battle, we get a shot of the white disk of the sun behind a smoky veil, with a dark trail of black smoke cutting sharply across it. The fiery attacks of the orcs and the burning of the city obscure the sun and create a cloud of shadow around the city of Eregion. This smoky pall creates, in essence, a poor man's dawnless day, protecting the orcs from the light of the sun. This localized cloud of gloom and shadow is particularly emphasized when the elves charge in on their white horses, and the sunlight which shines on their approach meets the shadow that shrouds the orc host, until only a narrow space and a sharp line demarcating the light from the darkness divides the two armies. And of course, Galadriel is on the shadowy side of the line, but we'll talk about that later. Although the episode starts with this clear light-dark demarcation, however, things don't always remain that simple, especially when it comes to Adar and his actions. Adar's final and triumphant charge happens at the break of day, as the sun is creeping into the sky. We are accustomed to dawn as a symbol for the victory of light over darkness, as is most dramatically illustrated at the Battle of Helm's Deep. But Adar's final charge is what comes with the dawn in this battle. Adar is often backlit by the sunlight as well, with the white sunlight shining through his distinctly reddish hair. These shots point to an important moral ambiguity in Adar's character, but it's perhaps not the one that immediately leaps to mind. I think those shots of Adar in the sunlight are not meant to suggest that he, really has a heart of gold under his cruel exterior. In the context of his relationship with the orcs, the sunlight itself is the sign of his cruelty and disregard. If you look carefully in some of those charging scenes, you can see in the air behind Adar over the orcs what looks like it might be morning mist, but which I believe to be the smoke rising from the skin of his orc troops. We have seen orcs operate in the sunlight for short periods before, a light smoke rising from them as they walk or fight. At the end of the battle, Adar's charge is well and truly ruthless. He offers no quarter to his wounded and desperate enemies, and he shows no mercy to his tortured but faithful children. The episode begins with smoke rising from the city, and ends with smoke rising from his own troops. Adar is prepared to let everything burn in order to gain his objective. Adar's relationship with his children is a major element in his story in Episode 7. We see Adar kneeling in sincere grief over the dead bodies of the orcs at their funeral rites. Even his presence there is a testimony to his care. He's just discovered that Galadriel has escaped, but he still takes the time to show up and mourn for his dead children, even at the risk of losing his prisoner, which he does. But Glug, his trusty lieutenant, is increasingly concerned throughout the battle. Adar callously lets his children die, as Elrond carefully points out in front of the other orcs in his tent. Not only does he let them die in battle, he doesn't even seem to care that Damrod the Troll is going to slay many of them needlessly and very callously, as when he holds up 2 orcs to use as a shield to absorb the arrows of the elves. Now, Adar can explain his apparent disregard for orcish lives and well-being. Sauron must not escape. He must be destroyed at any cost. Glug is obviously disturbed by the implications of at any cost, and he reminds Adar in the Black Speech that he told the orcs that he loved them. Adar, by the way, must have personally introduced the word love into the vocabulary of the Black Speech, I think. Anyway, Adar's explanation is a thoughtful one. He says that he loves his children too much to let them become Sauron's slaves. There's a logic to that, of course, but I think maybe somebody ought to have told Adar something about means and ends. Maybe he needs a sit-down with Prince Durin or Queen Muriel or something. It would probably do him good. Glug's choice to distance himself from Adar is a clear indication that Adar's pursuit of his protective ends by ruthless means has lost him the loyalty of his children. Gil-galad, by contrast, comes to his people and stands by them when all seems lost. I don't really understand where Gil-galad was at the start of the battle. Elrond's asking him what he's doing there when he does finally show up suggests that he was off somewhere safe while his herald led the troops into battle without him. That's prudent, I suppose, but it doesn't really sit very well with me as a general rule. Leaders are not supposed to be leading from behind, and the whole point of the elves having a High King seems like it was to have someone to lead them into battle. We last saw Gil-galad wearing Vilya and working out how to wield his own power. His allowing Elrond to lead the army is certainly a humble move, but I don't love that it seems self-protective as well. But when Gil-galad does show up, he does act like the king. Yes, I agree that a king should be where the need is greatest. That's the way. His taking command and leading the elves in their final desperate defense is noble and resolute. I assume that his relationship with his ring is going to come into play again, perhaps in Episode 8. Speaking of relationships to elven rings, let's talk about Elrond. Elrond is wearing Nenya around his neck on a chain, just like Frodo wears the One Ring in the book. I am not quite sure what to make of this, to be honest. On the one hand, it could suggest that he still sees the elven rings as evil and corrupting, and so he bears it around his neck to keep it safe without compromising himself much. On the other hand, when Frodo wore the ring on a chain around his neck, he was called the ring bearer. Has Elrond, as the bearer of one of the three, taken a baby step towards taking the ring up himself? And would that be a bad thing, like it is when Frodo does it? As I say, I'm not really sure what to do with that particular cue. It seems very possible, however, that Elrond is beginning to have second thoughts about Galadriel and her relationship with Nenya. Remember back to episode 4 and Elrond's pronounced distrust of both Galadriel and her ring. Episode 4, of course, was the big forgiveness episode, and you'll remember that I recommended that Elrond needed to think a little more about forgiveness. Galadriel had a Nenya-induced premonition that she was going to have to sacrifice herself, and so great was Elrond's distrust of Galadriel and her ring that he didn't even believe in her sacrifice when it actually happened. Or at least, he only believed that she was sacrificing herself to save the ring, not him and his companions. Elrond was running seriously low on forgiveness for his friend Galadriel. When they meet again in Adar's tent, Elrond is placed in a peculiar position. He blamed Galadriel for sacrificing herself to save the ring from Adar. Now, Adar asks him to give the ring in exchange for Galadriel's life. It is suddenly in Elrond's power effectively to reverse precisely the choice of Galadriel's, of which he was so critical. Elrond's refusal to do this could be taken in several different ways. For one thing, it's possible that he simply doesn't fall into the same trap that Galadriel did back in episode 6, trusting that the enemy will keep his side of a bargain or be sincere in his expressions of goodwill. Hey, Galadriel, watch me not collaborate with the enemy right here. Take notes or something. But I'm not sure that's all of it. Elrond has been very focused on means and ends. He has been rightfully concerned when the elves have repeatedly utilized what he believed to be corrupt and evil means, the rings, to achieve noble ends. But, of course, that assessment only holds if he's correct about the badness of the means. Elrond's concern about the corruption of the rings has been totally understandable and quite legit, I think. There was reason to be concerned. But remember also Círdan's advice to him about humility, about judging the work instead of those that wrought it, since he is not the judge who can see all things. In Adar's tent, Elrond seems to me to see Galadriel's works with different eyes. She sacrificed herself to save him, and he doubted her motivations. He was judging the person. Now he seems to see her works more clearly. Nobody knows better than Elrond that Galadriel's vengeance against Sauron was the most important thing to her. She was completely obsessed with it. But when she has the premonition of her own sacrifice, she bequeaths the defeat of Sauron to Elrond. She was willing to die to keep the orcs from taking Elrond and the rest, and to keep Nenya out of Adar's hands. Elrond now seems to respect that sacrifice, even in a sense to endorse it. By refusing to ransom her with Nenya, he is coming down on her side, recognizing that she did the right thing. And maybe keeping the ring out of Adar's hands is, in fact, the right thing to do. For it's not just Galadriel that Elrond has been judging, despite the fact that he's not the judge who sees all things. He has been judging Nenya itself in the same way. He believes it was corrupted by Sauron, and it's not a crazy thing to think. But, as Círdan said, judge the work. As I pointed out in episode 4, the works of Nenya have actually been pretty good. Perhaps Elrond is even beginning to question his conclusions there. In any case, his actions, refusing to give Nenya to Adar, even at the apparent cost of Galadriel's life, suggest that his assessment of the ring might be changing. The most important moment in the tent scene, however, is Elrond's tender moment of reconnection with Galadriel. So, trigger warning, I'm going to talk about the kiss now. And I know that it might really bother you that Elrond kisses Galadriel on the mouth here. I've tried to address this very understandable reaction in the separate segment that was released earlier. If you're still in some level of freak out about this and haven't watched that separate segment yet, I encourage you to go watch it and then come back. Because now we're going to set aside those reactions and think about the work that this moment does do in the story. The primary thing I would point out is that the kiss is a gesture of affection that is clearly an act of reconciliation. I've said that Elrond, at the end of episode 4, needed a major infusion of forgiveness. In episode 7, his wounded and proud stubbornness does relent, and he does extend forgiveness. And what I love most is that he doesn't just say, "I forgive you." That kind of forgiveness can be mostly pride or even arrogance. It can be based in large part on an insistence that the other person was in fact the one who was in the wrong all the time. Instead, Elrond extends his forgiveness by saying, "Forgive me." He acknowledges that he treated Galadriel badly, which he certainly did, and his admission in itself implies an act of forgiveness of her. It's kind of hard to sincerely ask forgiveness of someone who has also harmed you without granting some forgiveness yourself. This is a really important step, and more than anything, his change of heart towards Galadriel makes me wonder if he's begun to change his mind about her ring. Elrond's faith in his friend Durin is so complete that it is heartbreaking. We've already discussed Durin's choice to delay his coming, and I have said that I think Durin is doing the right thing. From Elrond's perspective, however, the failure of Durin to appear defies explanation. His confidence is so absolute that Elrond seems actually incapable of processing what happens. He keeps repeating it over and over again, like a prayer or maybe a creed. Durin will come. Durin will come. As of the end of this episode, it just seems like a crushing blow to Elrond that has shaken loose his very reason. He is clinging to the one idea like a drowning man clings to a beam of his broken ship. Durin will come. He could express disillusion. He has reason to feel betrayed, but he does not do either. He doesn't understand what happened. But all he can do is repeat his conviction that Durin will come. Personally, I don't think he's going to end up being wrong. I think the stranger is going to go rescue his friends, and in doing so find his staff and his destiny. We already saw Elendil put his faith over his love and regain them both. I suspect that Durin will also be able to save Khazad-dûm and also rescue his friend. But it doesn't look good at the end of episode 7. Galadriel now, at the start of the episode, is barely hanging on. She has, I sincerely hope, hit rock bottom with her second round of convincing herself she was doing the right things while actually collaborating with the enemy. The horror and self-loathing we see on her face near the end of episode 6 has settled by the start of episode 7 into a quiet despair and what seems like an almost complete loss of the will to live. In the cavalry onset, her cage is appropriately on the shadowy side of the light divide, marking her plainly as a collaborator. When her presence thwarts the rousing charge of her friends, protecting the forces of evil and allowing them to escape and prosper, well, that's pretty much par for the course for Galadriel. She stands listlessly in her cage, her body almost limp, her eyes dull and lifeless as the orc spear presses into her throat. She looks like someone who would not mind being killed one little bit. In Adar's tent as well, she stands slumped, leaning against a post, utterly defeated. The only time she does speak is to express the opinion that Elrond should have just killed her in the cavalry charge. Galadriel is in complete despair. What Galadriel needs, clearly, is a good makeout session with her future son-in-law. Oh, sorry, forgot to give the trigger warning this time. No, in all seriousness, I believe that this is the most important element of that exchange. I completely agree with Maggie's assessment of the score at that moment. The orchestral swell of her theme when they kiss certainly makes this moment feel like a romantically charged one for Galadriel. I think that that sense is totally misleading and rather unfortunate. However, although I did not feel this way when I first saw it, my subsequent viewings have led me to a different conclusion. My theory is that the burst of her theme accompanying the kiss is meant to convey a sudden rising of hope and of her spirits in that moment. Whatever we may think of it, the kiss is a major turning point for Galadriel in this episode. She is transformed from totally lifeless and almost longing for death to serving as an actual agent of hope for the rest of the episode. I don't just mean that she finds hope. I mean that she starts being a source of hope for others, such as Arondir and Celebrimbor. And what changes her is not romance, it's friendship. She has received the forgiveness of her friend in his gesture of affection. Remember, there is nothing in the world that Galadriel needed more at this moment than forgiveness. She is in utter despond, consumed by self-loathing. The rather startling expression of love and forgiveness from her friend, whose trust she knows she has lost, hits her like a jolt from a defibrillator. Her heart is now beating again. Galadriel's encounter with Celebrimbor is another beautiful moment, this time without any needlessly distressing personal intimacy. The mutual confessions are very important for them both. Both of them are honest, not only with each other, but with themselves for the first time. Both of their torments at being the agents of terrible evil through their own pride and foolishness are eased in the recognition and acknowledgement of that fact, and also in knowing that they're not alone. In this moment, they not only both recognize how they've been deceived and confess how they were complicit, but they both see how they have come through the deception. Neither suffers from illusion or delusion anymore. Celebrimbor goes further, for he is near the end of his character arc. His words about darkness and light are remarkable. He says that darkness cannot be opposed by mere strength. Only light can make the darkness flee. Forget about touching the darkness, Galadriel. This is good advice. I cheered when he said Namarie to her, just as I was urging Galadriel in the last episode. Namarie, Galadriel, be well, be good, do good, and may good go with you. For even if it weren't for the trailers, the fact that she is running off with the 9 hidden inside her tunic makes me suspect that she's going to confront Sauron again before we're done here in Season 2. Episode 7 opens with a panoramic view of the beautiful and peaceful world in which Sauron has imprisoned Celebrimbor. It's a happy world. It's literally a creator's fantasy. The sun is always shining encouragingly. The embers in the fire are always hot and glowing. There is even unobtrusive company in the person of Mr. Mouse. And most wonderfully of all, time doesn't even seem to pass there. It's the perfect escape into the world of creation and fruitful thought, as Celebrimbor himself observes to Annatar. Celebrimbor's tower workshop has become its own world, literally cut off and insulated from the rest of the world. Of course, that world is a lie. In Celebrimbor's workshop, the frontiers between the seen and the unseen world have become hopelessly confused. Sauron has made the normal world around Celebrimbor unseen, and the deceitful illusion in which he is immersed is like an inversion of the unseen world, in which things of past, present, and future are seen as they really are. Celebrimbor, instead, sees unseen things that are not, though they are as he would wish them to be. In the midst of all of this confusion of seen and unseen, real and unreal, Celebrimbor finally succeeds in forging the 9 rings. Based on what we saw in the Merdania experiment earlier in the season, we have reason to believe that the 9 are going to do more to transgress the boundaries between the seen and the unseen worlds than the other 10 rings have yet done. It seems important that Sauron's illusion should provide the immediate context for the making of the 9. We won't see the 9 in action until Season 3 at least, I'm sure. But when we do, we should keep in mind the association with this illusion, this confusion of boundaries that the show creates around their forging. Now, there are 2 things that lead Celebrimbor to realize that he's imprisoned in illusion. One is the glimpses he receives of actual damage and grime that the illusion is covering up. The Hammer of Feanor, relic of the Elder Days, has been damaged in the use, losing one of its rubies. Celebrimbor's own face is dirty, bloodied, and lined with overwork and care. He is not well. The illusion quickly compensates and covers those glimpses back up, but they are enough to raise the suspicion that the gap between appearance and reality exists. Once that suspicion is present, Celebrimbor then begins to become suspicious of the very conveniences that the illusion offers. I am particularly interested in Celebrimbor's wry comment that they appear to have all the time they need, since the candles have not burned an inch all day. Before the invention of clocks, the burning down of candles was a very common way to measure the passing of time. The apparent timelessness in which Celebrimbor's workshop has been suspended is on the one hand a creator's dream. Have you ever gotten lost in doing something you enjoy and lost track of time passing? Wouldn't it be amazing if it could turn out that as little time actually passed as it seemed? Celebrimbor was living the dream, but now he seeks to wake from that dream. A really interesting side note here. Think about this. Where in the Lord of the Rings do we encounter a place where time doesn't seem to pass at all? Well, Sam loses track of time so thoroughly in Lothlorien that he thinks only a few days have passed when he has actually been there for a whole month. While he was in Galadriel's land, he felt like he was in a world outside the flow of time. In Rivendell, also, Bilbo tells Frodo that time doesn't seem to pass here, it just is. And what do Lothlorien and Rivendell have in common? They are the two locations which exist under the influence of the Elven Rings of Power. The three rings have the power to stand against time and its effects, at least in part. I was really struck by this connection on watching this episode. The link would suggest that there's something fundamentally similar about the restful peace and timeless beauty of Lothlorien and Rivendell and the illusory calm of Celebrimbor's prison. If you follow the parallel to its conclusion, it sounds like a pretty harsh indictment of the use of the three in the Third Age, but I think it's a fair one. Anyway, Celebrimbor's realization that Annatar has wrapped him in illusion leads him to the immediate conclusion that Annatar and his intentions are evil. No emissary of the Valar would do this, he insists. It's an interesting assertion, actually. I mean, he's right, but Annatar explains in his final attempt at deception that he was just giving Celebrimbor the peace and clarity that he himself admitted he had needed to complete his work. Why is that claim impossible? Why is the idea of benign motivations to the illusion totally unbelievable to Celebrimbor? Certainly, after Celebrimbor sees that his city is really burning and his people are actually dying, and that Annatar has been working to make sure he didn't even notice any of that, that can't be taken as a benign action. But his firm conclusion is drawn before he has yet seen the truth beneath the illusion. He has only just concluded that the illusion exists. Whatever this is hardly a gift, he says. Once Celebrimbor perceives that he has been wrapped in illusion, he knows, he doesn't suspect, he knows that something malicious has been done to him. My own suspicion is that Celebrimbor is angry in part at himself. He has in fact been complicit all along. He is the one who lied to the High King, cutting himself off from the rest of the elves. He's the one who is increasingly abusive to his assistant smiths, which led to his total isolation in the tower. He is the one who was resistant to thinking about any of his other duties, delegating them to Annatar so that he, Celebrimbor, could focus on his work. Sauron's illusion is malicious, but it is in fact what Celebrimbor wanted, and he was, in a sense, complicit. I think that his sense of guilt for how he has acted, for the choices that he has made, are what inspire his immediate conviction that the illusion is evil. It resonates too much with his own choices that he knows to be wrong. I think that this same sense of guilt is also why he frames his accusatory questions as he does at first, demanding, "What have you done to me?" He wants to see himself as a completely innocent victim, but he's not. Now, you might be thinking, dude, that's exactly the same narcissistic crap that Sauron himself is going to pull on Celebrimbor later in the episode, blaming the victim for bringing about his own suffering. Sauron says that his sufferings are his own fault, and that any pain he experiences he brought on himself. That's untrue, of course, but Sauron almost never really tells a lie. Like all of Sauron's statements, even these are in a sense true, or are based on an element of truth. Celebrimbor did invite Sauron in, and he has repeatedly made bad choices that have given Sauron power over him. The prison of illusion that he has become ensnared in was, of course, something that Sauron had done to him, but it is also a kind of projection of his own decisions, his own willful blindness to the consequences of his actions. Once the veil is pierced, dreamlike fantasy is replaced by harsh and horrible reality for Celebrimbor. There is a terrible parallel between the first scene, in which he forges the 9 rings in the midst of peace and beauty, and the later scene, in which he sits glumly setting the gems of the 9 amidst squalor and with his wrist chained to the workbench. The 2 scenes are really the same, one showing the appearance, how it looked from Celebrimbor's perspective, and the other showing the reality, how it truly has been all along. Notice what's happening? The real world, the seen world, shows us things as they really are, which is supposed to be a property of the unseen world. Again, the seen and the unseen world are being combined and confused as the 9 are being made. As Celebrimbor comes to a clearer and clearer understanding of his situation, he comes to see through Sauron himself in a new way. Sauron delivers a long and piteous speech about his sufferings at the hands of Morgoth. We should remember at this point the similar speech he gave to Galadriel at the end of Season 1, in which he glamorized both his deliverance from enslavement and his desire to heal the hurts of Middle-earth. Sauron declares now to Celebrimbor that he was fighting against Morgoth all along, in fact, that what Morgoth wished to destroy, he wished only to perfect. He describes his torture by Morgoth and his welcoming of the pain of his torment because it became a game to show which of their wills was the mightier. In Season 1, Galadriel sees through his flowery words when she perceives that to Sauron there is no distinction between saving Middle-earth and ruling it. He is holding out a glorious illusion to Galadriel, but she sees the ugly truth behind it, realizing that he is deceiving her. Here in Season 2, Celebrimbor sees even further. He sees that Sauron is the great deceiver, and so great is his deception that he can even deceive himself. Sauron lies to himself in the same way that he lies to everyone else, by telling the truth and twisting that truth into a deceptive narrative. There's a lot of discussion about the extent to which Sauron actually repented earlier on, and I have been on record as denying ever seeing any evidence of real repentance. However, I am very ready to agree with Celebrimbor's assessment. He has never repented. Heck, Sauron never really needed to repent, according to him. His intentions have always been good. He has always been the victim. Celebrimbor, however, does become free. His freedom of mind is made clear in his final conversation with Galadriel. In his first moment of complete honesty, Celebrimbor takes responsibility for what happened. Yes, he was deceived, but he also desired. He wanted what Anatar offered, even though part of him knew it was a temptation. Sauron began by putting on a false show of glory and ended by insulating Celebrimbor completely within an illusion. But Celebrimbor says it was he who blinded himself to who Anatar really was. His honest confession elicits a responding confession from Galadriel, who immediately sees her own truth in his words. Celebrimbor's pride, his desire for glory surpassing that of his pretty horrible grandfather, are what made him vulnerable to Sauron's deception. Celebrimbor only achieves this freedom, this clarity of mind, after he secures his physical release from the manacle with which Sauron has bound him to his workbench, a manacle which obviously acts as an outward symbol of Celebrimbor's enslavement from its first appearance. I think that some people might not like Celebrimbor's amputation of his own thumb as a means of escape from his shackles, probably for several reasons. I have to admit, though, that I found it rather gruesomely appealing as a kind of emblematic moment. Celebrimbor is not able, with his tools, to free himself from Sauron's chains. His tools of creation cannot save him. Only sacrifice can. Only by destroying the hand with which he made things can he become free. He has spoken of sacrifice, but he himself has never actually sacrificed anything. He's been trying to gain things. If it was desire for the power to make wonders that enslaved him, the power that he would gain from the gifts that Anatar had to give, it was only by giving up permanently the ability to craft things that he was able to make himself free. From the first time I heard it, Celebrimbor's favorite saying that true creation requires sacrifice sounded alarming and kind of creepy to me. It can be taken benignly, pointing to the sacrifice that an artist makes in order to dedicate themselves to their craft, but it was always creepy and weird. It was too obviously twistable into an evil callousness to the suffering of others. Celebrimbor maiming his own hand, however, brings this idea of sacrifice around full circle, and Celebrimbor makes the sacrifice. One final note. on the subject of sacrifice and true creation. The revelation that the mithril Celebrimbor was using to make the 9 was actually the blood of Sauron himself was a really cool moment, I thought. First, as I already discussed, it showed that King Durin did in fact resist domination by Sauron, and he really did say no to him in episode 6. Also, it shows a really interesting pattern in the forging of the rings. The 3 are made in accordance with suggestions made by Sauron. They are partly inspired by him, but he doesn't touch them. The 7 are touched by him, and he does something to the mithril that goes into them. But what he does is sort of impersonal, outside himself. The 9 are made in part from his own blood. They are tied to his very being. The 1, of course, according to the book, is going to be forged out of his own power and spiritual essence, which he will pour into the One Ring. The escalation of Sauron's experimentation and increasing investment in the rings is really well constructed, I think. Sauron has bled for the 9, and he throws Celebrimbor's saying about sacrifice back in his face. But he hasn't truly sacrificed anything yet, I think. But, as usual, Sauron is not lying. He has learned this important lesson from Celebrimbor, and we should watch that theme carefully in Season 3, which is when I expect to see the One Ring being forged. In the quite lovely final scene between Celebrimbor and Galadriel, Celebrimbor has some parting words. The elves need only remember, he says, that it is not strength that overcomes darkness, but light. Here in episode 7, we hear what sounds to me very much like the core theme of the entirety of season 2. Think about the themes we have already been looking at throughout the season. We have discussed the idea of the enveloping shadow that spreads and overwhelms many things. As Celebrimbor says, there may be no one in Middle-earth strong enough to fight against that shadow. We have discussed the importance of forgiveness, which is also a form of fighting darkness with light rather than strength. Revenge is fighting darkness with strength. Forgiveness is fighting darkness with light. We have discussed the use of power and the temptation to power and the ever-present question of means and ends. Celebrimbor's wisdom points to the heart of that issue. In the end, the power that we might be tempted to seize in order to accomplish good and noble ends is not only wrong and corrupting, but it's a cheat. It's not only bad for us morally, but it doesn't even work. It isn't power that can defeat darkness, but light. Most closely, it echoes the theme from episode 6, Namarie, being well, being good in times of trial. It isn't power that can defeat evil, but goodness. The way that Celebrimbor's saying both encapsulates so many of the core themes of the season and also picks up on the light and darkness imagery that was so prominent in season 1 convinces me that Celebrimbor, on what will probably be his final day, has had the inspiration that articulates the moral core of season 2. The marketing campaign for the season has been emphasizing that darkness will rise in season 2, and it certainly does. Celebrimbor has now taught us how to deal with it. Okay, let's talk about Adar's identity. I've said before that I am not at all convinced that we're supposed to recognize his character. That is, I don't think he's going to turn out to be a named character from the Silmarillion or something. In particular, I have tried several times to pour cold water on the idea that he might be Maglor, son of Fëanor. After episode 7, however, I want to make both a confession and a concession about this issue. Here's the confession. Despite the convictions I've just stated, while watching episode 7, I was struck by a horrible suspicion that had never occurred to me. The thing that started my line of thinking was Adar's hair, which looked distinctly reddish in the sunlight. For careful Tolkien readers, a red-haired elf immediately suggests the House of Fëanor. Remember the mean red-haired elf kid who sank Galadriel's paper boat and almost got punched in the face for it back at the start of season 1? Fëanorian all day long. Then, of course, I couldn't help but remember Adar's Fëanorian lisp, which nicely accessorizes his red hair. Then I was staring at the burns on his face, and that's when the crazy idea hit me. What if he were actually Amrod? Now, if you're a casual Tolkien fan, you'll be saying, who the heck is Amrod? Well, Amrod is one of the sons of Feanor, one of the 2 youngest of the 7 who were twins. If you've read the Silmarillion, you'll now be saying, wasn't Amrod accounted for during most of the First Age? And why should a burned face make you think of him particularly? So, remember when Feanor lands in Middle-earth and sets fire to the swan ships? Well, in his later writings, Tolkien suggested an alternative and rather horrible version of this story, in which when Feanor burned the ships, Amrod, his son, was accidentally trapped inside one and burned to death. Unless, of course, he was actually saved at the last minute and taken, burned and disfigured by Morgoth, who tortured him and turned him into a cruel but sensitive father figure to the Uruks. Now, I'm not saying that I find this theory genuinely convincing. If Adar is actually meant to be one of the progenitors of the orcs, he would come into the story way too late to do his progenitor thing if he were Amrod. As James and I discussed, I don't think it's likely that Adar is one of the exiles from Valinor. The timing is just weird. But despite all of these reasons, I couldn't help but indulge the idea a little bit. After all, this kind of story, one of which Tolkien wrote a variant version late in his life, is exactly the kind of element that this show seems to take particular delight in incorporating into its adaptation. So I couldn't just dismiss it, even though I don't really think all of the evidence is consistent with it. But finally, here's my concession. I have been resistant to the Feanorian Adar origin in general, and the Maglor identification in particular all along. But I will concede that the little Feanorian touches on Adar are starting to accumulate a bit. Though I still don't think the idea of Adar as a Feanorian really makes much sense, the general association is a little harder to dismiss now. I think that perhaps the Feanorian Easter eggs do encourage us to think about Adar in these terms in a sense, to think at least about the themes and concepts associated with the Feanorians and to consider Adar in that light. Actually, that sounds like a really interesting topic for a presentation at one of Signum University's moots. Maybe somebody will write that one someday. Episode 1 of Season 2 reminded us that Halbrand's first words to Galadriel when she swims to his raft are, "The tides of fate are flowing." Now, how many of you recognize that as a Lord of the Rings quotation? Full confession, I completely missed that every time. Kudos to Ben Davis, our director here at Rings and Realms, for spotting it recently and pointing it out. And here's what's extra fun. Guess who says that quotation in the book? Galadriel! At the end of the Mirror of Galadriel scene, Galadriel has just experienced her temptation and said, "I passed the test. I will diminish and go into the west and remain Galadriel." Immediately after that famous moment, however, she tells Frodo and Sam, "In the morning you must depart, for now we have chosen and the tides of fate are flowing." Like Halbrand, Galadriel's usage of the phrase points to the conjunction of choice and destiny. Galadriel uses it at the end of a sentence, observing that their choices have first been made, and now the tides of fate are flowing, in or out, bearing them along. Halbrand uses it at the beginning of his sentence and his speech, suggesting that the tides of fate have swept him and Galadriel together, and that their choices, which will follow, will determine their destination. It's a really cool connection, and I need to think about it more and how Halbrand's inversion of the phrase interacts with how fate and choice are integrated together in that scene and through his speech, as they clearly are. But I wanted to share that there was yet another Fellowship of the Ring quotation that we missed before, and we can't have that. Well, that was something. Wow, we're definitely covering a lot of ground now.
Yep, we only have one episode left from this season of Rings of Power, and just a note, this last one won't come out right away. Corey's overseas and I'm in LA for the next few days, so we want to make sure that we have enough time to dig into this final episode. Keep an eye on the page or our socials and subscribe now.
Yeah, so our analysis of episode 8 will probably be coming out a few days later than usual in that following week. And then we have our retrospective weekend, where we will be joined by Alan Sisto from the Prancing Pony podcast and the Rings of Power wrap-up, Matt from Nerd of the Rings, Kirsten from theonering.net, and probably a few more surprise attendees. We're not quite done talking about all there is to talk about here.
Never. Thanks again for joining us, pledging, supporting, chatting, commiserating, laughing, and overall just for joining us on this wild ride.
We're gonna be okay.
I think we're gonna make it.
Yeah.